Thomas, and I'm a poet and a fiction writer, but I think I'm primarily going to read poetry tonight. I thought I would do kind of a sandwich with some new poems and then maybe a little bit of fiction in the middle, and then some poems from my first book, Motherland, to round out the evening. I normally live in North Carolina. Right now, I am in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, in an Airbnb that is above a cannabis dispensary. And the main thing that I notice about this flat is that there's a lot of air freshener going on. So I'm going to be like dreaming that I'm drinking pina coladas all night. So that's the current situation here. So I'm going to start with some poems, some newer poems that are part of, I have a book that's been forthcoming for about a year and I still don't have a publication date. So these are like these endlessly forthcoming poems from this endlessly forthcoming book called Among the Living. But there are some newer ones, and I thought it would be fun to read a lot from that tonight. And then again, follow it with maybe a little snippet of fiction from The Blackbird and Other Stories from Wise Blood Books. That was last year. And then finish with some older poems from my first book. So, but the time frame, 40 minutes. We probably should have talked about this before we started recording.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay, great. Yeah, I don't want to go too long and keep everybody endlessly, but
I told folks this is over at 8 o'clock, so that's the main
okay, limit. Great. Got my eye on the clock then. Okay. So I'm going to start with a poem called Obad with Grackle, which appeared in the first issue of Steve Knepper's excellent New Verse Review. We were talking about New Verse Review before we got started. It's a great new poetry journal, which I would say even if I weren't on the advisory board, but it really is. So this poem is called Obad with Grackle, and I think all I really want to say about it is it's set in Texas where some of my children live, which we don't really have a lot of this kind of grackle in North Carolina where I live, but the grackles are just kind of like the Texas bird, and they have this weird metallic call, and I find them really fascinating. And I wanted to write a poem in Ottava Rima, so this was kind of the outcome of that experiment. Obad with Grackle. A grackle called from the greening backyard oak, one long derisive note. The sky hung white above the house. Inside, still half awake, I listened to the neighborhood. The quiet gave way to dogs and hens, the first rough stroke of someone's pickup engine. Rising light seeped in like water through the plastic blind. The day stepped forward, meaning to be kind. The day stepped forward, meaning to be kind, I thought, because I liked the thought, preferred the time to have intent, the world a mind attuned to goodness. Still the new leaves stirred in random patterns, each leaf like one hand that clapped itself on air and never heard what sound it made. The grackle's taunting call said, "This is it. There's nothing else. That's all." So this is it. There's nothing else. That's all, the grackle said. But what do grackles know except the wind that chuffs them, every squall and upthrust wave they breast and surf and row? Alive, sleek, shining dark, all rudder tail and hollow bone, they don't ask where to go or how. What time they have suffices them. I don't remember now the day that came. I don't remember now the day that came to me. I lay in bed and heard the quiet, that one note piercing it. The waking dream of memory loses focus there. The light remains that rose so grayly in that room to bring me news of other things in flight and waken me to my own life, although what kindness that day wrought, I do not know. Okay, this next poem is called Chaos Theory, which is a concept in physics, and I know exactly as much about chaos theory as you too can find out on Wikipedia. I'm not a physicist, but I was interested in the idea of, things seeming random, but not really being random, which is like probably not. I think chaos theory is probably more sophisticated than that, but this was my takeaway. So that's this poem, Chaos Theory. Rummaging redbud leaves, the mock orange, overgrown, flopped sideways on the fence. The April afternoon grows slant and strange. Massing storm clouds turn the light intense, eclipse-like, unfamiliar. My own name becomes an incoherence when I sign the bottom of a check, a doctor's form. I introduce myself. What do I mean? Chaos is not a theory. I mean, it's not just that, but a description of the real. Patterns and repetitions in the knot we call this life defy our patient skill to pick it open, tie it back together in some way that makes sense to us, to us who try to read the weather. My back porch table holds a scattered cosmos, disjointed, bleached down deer bone specimens, last year's wren's nest fallen from the eaves, split brown cicada shells, some blank-eyed snakeskins, brittle, tessellated. Heart-shaped leaves unfurling on the understory trees cast shadows within shadows. My children's faces turn up in photographs, each a surprise I know by name. Say I set 7 places for lunch, though there were only 6 of us when everyone lived here. Then our existence was chaos. I loved it. And that 7th place, I invented it just now to make not sense, but sound. I needed syllables. Say I did set the extra place, though. Why would I do a thing like that unless the unexpected, another child, a latecomer, a new Elijah at the window, was the way the world cohered? Perpetual resonances, crazings of experience, each day, sorry, there's a lot of traffic noise. Each day, rising from its grave, its random promises lined up like children by a schoolroom door, wild spring weather outside answering the rhythmic murmurs of their hearts and more. That's how it is. This thing is like that thing. I'm going to read another poem that just kind of started as an experiment in form. Well, no, I'm not. Actually, I'm going to read something before that. This is another really new poem called Spring Twilight After Penance. And I don't really have anything that interesting to say about it. I'll just read it. Spring Twilight After Penance. Let's say you've just come from confession. Late sun pours through the budding trees that mark the brown creek washing itself beyond the field. 2 men who had been mowing the first greening grass have stopped to kick a ball. And you, let's say, have stepped from church gloom, the smell of candles blown out. 12 people still wait in line along the wall. Each still carries some dead weight of faults. Your own confessed sins, venial, dull as breakfast. Let's say you've set them down. You've rattled off the first joyful mystery, kneeling there in the hard pew. Shriven, a new creation, full again of grace, same as last time, you step into the evening. The long golden twilight swarms with gnats or grass motes kicked up by the mowers, which now have stopped so that as you unlock your car, trying to believe that you have changed your life, the only sound anywhere is the ball's hollow thunk and laughter, 2 men joking in a language you don't speak. Okay, now I am going to read this poem that began as a form experiment. This poem is a is a 36, which is Italian for 36. Again, I don't speak Italian any more than I know physics. So, just putting it on here. This is a form invented by the American poet John Chardy, and its rules are this: as the name indicates, it's a poem of 36 lines. It's in 6 sestets, and it's sort of like a sestina, but they mean other than sixes. That's kind of where it ends. Each sestet is like a heroic sestet. Its rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, C, C. And it's a cascade poem, which means that every line of the first stanza, those 6 lines, become the first lines of subsequent stanzas. So line 2 in stanza 1 becomes line 1 of the next stanza, and the poem kind of unfolds from there. And I really like repeating forms. I mean, I kind of like their ruminative quality and their obsessive quality, and the way that, especially when lines come up again and again, they sort of, like, I don't ever have any great, scheme. Oh, now this line will mean this. But it just, in this sort of incantatory way, lines that come up again and again can just seem to resonate in new and different ways every time they repeat. And so I actually wound up repeating a lot more lines in this poem than I technically had to for the demands of the form. But anyway, it's a lot of fun. Everybody go write a 36. This one is called The Bell. Today is here, tomorrow's there. Yesterday lies where it fell. Time's a line that points to where we go. The last tram rings its bell. Where tracks run into grass, descend. Let's start walking past the end. Yesterday lies where it fell, when our mothers called us in. Waters greening down the well. Droning houseflies live in sin. Our dogs broke loose and ran away. Nothing that we love can stay. Time's a line that points to where we're going. Can you read the map? Cicada songs abrade the air all afternoon. You need a nap. Pull down your hat to shade your eyes and try to think of lullabies. We go, the last tram rings its bell, along the blinding boulevard. Yesterday lies where it fell. Tomorrow's sunning in the yard. Poplars waver in the dust. Summers fly where summers must. Where tracks run into grass, descend, run barefoot through the shivering green. Where are we? Don't you know? Pretend that we were born here. Hills unseen stand tall and blue behind a cloud. Late cicadas cry aloud. Let's start walking past the end of everything we ever knew. Let evening take us by the hand. Shadows like the hills are blue. Yesterday lies where it fell. Somewhere the last tram rings its bell. Okay, I'm going to read just a few more from this book of poems before I turn to some fiction. Let's see, what did I put on my list? Okay. I'm going to read a poem that I keep meaning to read and then forgetting every time I do a reading. It's a poem that I wrote for one of my sons who is a wildland firefighter. And it was sort of triggered by, he's in his 5th year, I think, of fighting fires. And in his very first year, he was working for an Oregon State Forestry District. Goodness, this neighborhood has suddenly become very loud. And he took this picture of fire. He had gone to, put out this fire. And either he took the picture and somebody else is in it, or somebody else took a picture of him. I'm not even sure who the guy is in the corner of the picture. But it's this weird kind of like, that Goya painting, The Tempest, where, you have this huge kind of dramatic landscape and then, these little human figures down in the corner. And you know, I mean, once you sort of get over, okay, that's my child and they're standing in fire. It just was this fascinating, provocative kind of picture that I wanted to write something about. So I guess this is sort of like an ekphrastic poem, but anyway, it's called Wildland Fire for my son at 23. That night, the fire you photographed, respiring and pulsing in the trees' bare bones and scouring mountainsides and hissing its exultate in the air and underground through root systems, capillaries of buried flame, existed, neither memory nor dream. Deep inside that grove of embers, one man in yellow, you held up your phone to trap the moment. Later, you tried to say what showed itself to you that night. The way the world burns down, it's like this, beautiful and metastatic. Next year, when this shell of ash is downed with grass, you will have followed other fires through other distant, harrowed darknesses. You'll walk on glowing coals while in the trees a windblown fire crown rolls and surfs, devouring miles in smoky sun. Amber dusk. You won't remember when you took this shot, what day or year or hour. You won't remember where. Fire's always fire. And one more. This is just a hiking poem. My husband and I like to hike a lot in the Linville Gorge Wilderness in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. And anyway, I wrote this poem about that and about how you know that what you see is real, or the fact that our ability to know what we see is limited because we are human and therefore unreliable. This poem is called As Though, and the place is Hawksbill Peak, Nebo, North Carolina. And the name of the peak is kind of important, actually. It comes up in the poem. So Hawksbill. The hills fall down in blue, an undulant perspective, sky and trees that touch each other as shadows touch the living things that cast them. But which thing is the thing and which the shadow? From where I'm standing, here, this table rock, scrubbed clean by wind and rain, it's hard to tell where substance ends and likenesses begin. Across the gorge, a water-laden storm front unleashes rain, or else that stone I'm seeing, a line of balds, not clouds, that raise themselves to meet the clouds. I've hiked this way before. I've stood here looking out to where the hidden river chafes through rock. Beneath my feet, a peak that someone thought recalled a hawk's life-gutting beak, or else the folding knife named for it. All we know is made of metaphor. This planing wind becomes a constant noise inside my head, a sound like tearing paper, or like a dry field gushing up in flame, as though the world were ending, as though what I stood here looking at were not blue hills, but clouds with angels and the Son of Man, as though this were a vision, not mere seeing. Though I believe in things outside myself, a whole reality composed by one great thinker, still my human eyes arrange the stone, the tree, the line where land meets sky. My eyes pass on those shapes to be translated into a human language, this and that. When I look down, bare quartzite, shelved with lichen, thrust up its layered, weather-beveled edges like more gray lichen. Grasses clump and seam where windblown sediment has settled. Here and there, a rain-filled rock pool like an eye shines as though it saw the sky it holds. So I'm going to put these poems aside and read just a little bit of fiction. I'm going to read just the first few pages of, so this is my book of short stories, The Blackbird and Other Stories. My youngest daughter did the woodblock print that is on the cover. So I always have to shout out to my daughter, Rachel. who is an artist. So the collection closes with a novella called The Happy Place. And I'm going to read just the first few pages of that and then move back to some poems to finish. The Happy Place. Amelia's mother died, but the beach house remained. Through illness and decline and grief, Amelia had forgotten the house, except as a relic of childhood memory. Nobody had spoken of it. Nobody had gone to see about it. There had been assisted living, then the memory unit, the private caregiver. There had been the sale of Amelia's childhood home, the dispersal of her mother's furniture and goods. In the end, there had been the funeral, the tracking down of some kind of minister, the inevitable eulogy with its vague assertions that the deceased had been a good woman who loved God. Last, there had been the cremation, a whole existence going up in smoke, the ashes gathered and decorously shelved in a columbarium. Well, that's over, Amelia had thought. But it wasn't over. Death was not the end at all. Here suddenly were taxes coming due. Here was paperwork from the management company documenting the rental income, the company's percentage subtracted. There the house stood right where they had left it. It had not gone up in smoke at all. You got yourself a waterfront property, all right, said the lawyer, son of her father's old law partner who had handled her mother's affairs. Technically, Amelia was the one who handled these affairs, but until now, handling had meant signing the papers the lawyer faxed her, not always looking that closely at what she was signing. Yada, yada, same old, scrawl, 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 fax it all back. Then on with her real life, which was complicated and demanded her full attention. There was her counseling practice. There was her divorce, which had turned out to be, in its own way, as demanding as the marriage had been, a whole other full-time job. There was the whole business of co-parenting, of keeping straight which weeks were hers, and therefore which class parties demanded that she burn a pan of brownies the night before, then lock herself in the bathroom with the fan on to cry. And then her mother had entered her long decline. Amelia, the only living child, had had to go back and forth to visit her, to take her out driving, to consult with the staff and with her private attendant, to worry about what her mother ate or didn't eat, felt or didn't feel, knew or didn't know. It had been, as Amelia's daughter Mallory liked to say, a lot. It had been yet another job layered over the other two. She hadn't had time to read every word of every document that came her way. If the school office hadn't sent it, her modus operandi was to skim and sign, and who could blame her? But how could she have managed to overlook a whole house? If the lawyer had entertained an opinion about this lapse of attention, he'd kept it quiet. Well, she told herself in her own defense, on top of all her accumulated strata of responsibility, nobody had been down there in years. Her father and brother were dead. Her mother had lived in North Carolina, while Amelia lived in Texas. Though they might have called it a midway point, a good place to meet up, the Alabama coast made an inconvenient drive from either direction. And then her mother was ill, first with cancer, then with dementia. As her mother forgot things, Amelia tried to hold them in her mind. In one limited human mind, there was only so much room. As a psychologist, Amelia thought much about the marvel of the human mind with its plasticity, its regenerative powers. Still, you couldn't stretch it past its breaking point. Amelia's grandfather had built the beach house when he came home from World War II. When Amelia was a child, the family had gone there always, nowhere else. Where else was there to go? Her mother, Caroline, had been going there all her life. To the child Amelia, it had seemed as if there were only two places in the world, her own small Piedmont town and a sandy half-moon island looking out on the Gulf of Mexico. It had felt to her as if all summers were concentrated in this one spot, caught between the Gulf, the bay, and the gray rustling water of the Mississippi Sound. Fast forward a little bit here. Well, said Kurt, when she had hung up the phone and told him the news, it's paid for, isn't it? Of course it is. My grandfather built it. He didn't believe in debt. So it's actually an asset. The rental income is actual income. I suppose so. But we have to pay taxes and insurance, hurricane insurance, for crying out loud. And would we use it ourselves ever? We haven't yet, said Kurt, but we might. No, Amelia said, that was ridiculous. They had one house. The last thing she wanted was to be tied to another. If they had a beach house, they would feel obligated to use a beach house. She had grown up going nowhere but the beach house, not even knowing how the rest of the world might beckon to her. Two, she was a redhead with a redhead's vulnerable skin. In the aftermath of her sunburned childhood, she examined herself nightly for misshapen freckles and strange moles. Every now and again, she went to the dermatologist and had some odd spot shaved off. What would a person with that kind of skin do with a beach house except use it to commit slow-motion suicide? She called the management company that very afternoon and told them to put the house on the market. And then, to fast forward a little bit, she changes her mind about at least not going to see it. And she and Kurt and her 12-year-old daughter go to look it over before they put it on the market. So they're now at the house. She looked about her. Miraculously, through so many years of storms, the house had stood. Others had been swept away or else had been torn down to make way for new ones. But here it was, the same old house, a weathered cypress box raised on pilings, a new metal roof overhanging the familiar wraparound porch. The old picnic tables were long gone, of course. They had had one under the house, one on the porch. Now there were only a row of recycled plastic Adirondack chairs, all red. Inside, too, the house had been transformed. The wall between the living room and the little galley kitchen had been knocked out, the whole interior drywalled. It might have been any other anonymous house, rented out week to week, that people claimed briefly as if it were their own, then left behind without another thought. In bemusement, Amelia watched Mallory, childish again, as she could still sometimes be, run first into one bedroom, then into the other. Which one was your room? Mallory called. Depended, Amelia called back from the kitchen counter, where she was taking boxes of organic macaroni and cheese out of her shopping bag. Mallory put her head around the door from the little side hallway. Depended on what? Lots of things. Who was here mostly? When I was a really little girl, I slept with your Mimi and my daddy in that bedroom. She pointed in Mallory's direction. Or I slept with Ma in the one through that door by the fridge. Ma, Mallory ventured into the kitchen. My grandmother, that's what I named her. Amelia smiled at the memory. She hated being called that, but once I started, she was stuck with it, poor Ma. She hefted a gallon of milk into the refrigerator. And then when Ma got too old to come, I shared her room with my brother John. And then sometimes we slept in hammocks under the house. So you didn't have your own room, said Mallory with an only child's incredulity. At home I did, but this house was always kind of small. Back when it was built, it was a luxury just to have a house at the beach. You didn't mind sharing and roughing it some. It was like going to camp, but with your family. Can I sleep in a hammock under the house? Mallory, rummaging now through the drawers to turn up some treasure that was not a fish knife or a corkscrew, glanced up from her search, her eyes bright with the idea. No, said Amelia. Why not? You did. Those were different times, Amelia said. So I'll end with just a little, they go out to dinner, and then afterward in the dark, the three of them walked on the beach. Amelia brought the flashlight she had found in the pantry closet, left there by whom, to show Kurt and Mallory how you could surprise the ghost crabs. As they walked, their feet kicking up the mild surf, crab after crab, large or small, shining like the photo negative of a black spider, skittered sideways into the dark water ahead of them. Every time she saw one, Mallory screamed and did a little dance on the wet sand. They won't hurt you, Amelia said. I know, they're more scared of me, blah, blah, blah. Having for the moment exhausted the childish part of her, Mallory had shrugged on again her preteen guise, the persona that had heard everything already 1,000 times. 1,000 times twice, she sometimes implied, since she had to hear it all from Amelia and Michael separately. Or thrice, now that she had Kurt. To his credit, Kurt did not hand out cigars of paternal wisdom that often. I have had children, he said. I'm off the clock. Still, when Amelia declared some house rule, some directive or prohibition, she was careful to say, Kurt and I think. It was his house after all. But actually, that too, their house in Texas, was Amelia's house. She had bought it after the divorce, a modest little flat-roofed rancher in a down-at-heels 1950s subdivision full of live oaks and multi-generational non-English-speaking households. It had been her settlement house, her single mother house, the house of her new life. Now Kurt lived there with her, and on alternate weeks, so did Mallory. Amelia's new life was theirs now, together. Kurt had assented affably enough to her suggestion that he integrate into this existing arrangement. He had required only that the backyard shed be floored, insulated, plumbed, and wired for electricity so that he could make it his office. When his sons visited, as they had done at Christmas, they slept on air mattresses on the floor of this backyard office. Nevertheless, it seemed right to Amelia that she should suggest some authoritative role for Kurt. It seemed right, too, that now she should drop behind him a little, hand him the flashlight, and step into his footprints as she carried her thoughts down the beach. The moon was rising in a pale fog of cloud. Directly overhead, the Big Dipper pointed out the North Star exactly as it had always done. Amelia could remember standing on the dock with her father and John and Rick Emerson, the water of the inlet sloshing at their feet, the stars so bright above them that they seemed to crack along the sky. See the North Star, her father would say. See how those two stars point at it? Amelia would squint at the sky. Which two stars? There were thousands. Which two were the special two? Of course, she had been little then, only 8 or 9. The shapes in the night sky were an idea she understood, but when she looked, she saw only chaos. Okay, I'm gonna move for the last few minutes here to some more poems. And these are some older poems from my first book, Motherland, which came out about 5 years ago. And yeah, a lot of these poems are set in Cambridge, England, where we lived for 4 years when my husband was doing his PhD. So we have some poems that I wrote there, but also, I mean, it's been 22 years since we left, but, you know, poems looking back and on this really kind of formative time in our life as a family. So actually, I'll read several of these. Now the book opens actually with a memory poem called Change Ringing. And I mean, when you live in central Cambridge, there are lots of churches and church bells are ringing all the time. And, you know, people like to do change ringing, which is this pattern, you know, you'll have a whole carillon of bells, you know, in a church tower, and each one has its own rope, and, you know, you can ring them in these intricate patterns, which are, I mean, they're very cacophonous, but they're very beautiful too. And there's a whole Dorothy Sayers, Lord Peter Wimsey mystery that turns on change ringing, which is kind of cool. Another thing that I really don't know that much about, but the idea of it fascinates me, and I've heard a lot of it. So this poem is called Change Ringing. You remember church bells mainly, a wordless shape note singing on the sky, nightly, daily, as the baby fed, their ringing echoed the rhythm of sigh and suck, the lashes fluttering on the flushed cheek. You try to sort through images cluttering your mind's dark attic, and that's what you come up with, bells. Not your baby's fisted hand, his warm and varied smells, his wandering slate blue gaze, the dampness of his hair. What you find are clanging days and midnights in some chair, half dreaming while that clamor wavered the window pane. Caught in the memory's glamour, you nod in your chair again and nurse this living weight your heart's received. What of it? Recalling bells in the twilight, distractedly you love it. Let's see. Another sort of memory poem called Hindsight, about the unreliability of hindsight, which everything about this I think will be self-explanatory. Hindsight. Silence fell at daybreak when an early riser or a late-to-bedder might glance out into nothingness, pierced only by a bicycle's flickering red tail light, dwindling into gray, a seagoing boat that breasts the morning tide and traveling down the world's hazy curve is lost to sight. My memory likewise sets out from the known world of things I'm sure I saw and heard into murky, unmapped waters. If I wrote, those were happier days, at which false word would the anchor drag? Or the opposite, I cried buying clementines in the market. If I say it, I cannot make it true, or truer than it is. Coins in my pocket, yes. Were they enough? That I don't know. I see now in my mind the clear pond water aspect of a gusty winter's sunset. Starlings swirl like sediment. My daughter says, what, as I watch them? I forget. I remember how things looked, our narrow flat, the lane rain silvered. I can almost hear wind shivering through our windows. More than that, it isn't there. It isn't anywhere. Let's see. And yet another Cambridge poem pieced together out of some disparate experiences that sort of became one experience in the poem. This is called Foster Child. Everywhere she goes, he goes. She's brought him here to Sunday tea. He's been with me 2 weeks, she says, and shifts him deftly on her knee. The rest of us try not to see the fine blue feed tube in his nose or how his spine won't hold him up. She says, I've called him Samuel. He didn't have a name at all, just baby boy. She sets her cup out of reach by habit. He eyes it warily. Gray dusk falls over everything, our grate laid for a fire, the book-stacked desk, the clock, the cold remains of tea the strainer holds. She says, it's late. Please, could I lay him down somewhere? That's fine. He's not particular. Settled in our travel cot, he stares at her with old brown eyes, anxious, though he never cries, she boasts. Good boy. We'll see if he's adoptable. What if he's not? The thing is, you can never keep a child. They go their way. We snap the light off, leave the door ajar. In the other room, before the fire, all settled now, we sit and drink. The sherry and the evening sink. Firelight shudders on the floor, in the darkening window where our reflected faces loom and pass, like faces glancing from a bus, watching us briefly, and through these apparitions, the empty trees. Let's see, there are a few poems from this book that I actually don't think I've ever read. So I think I will read at least one or two of them now, I mean, out loud. I obviously have read them. Several different junctures, several different years, starting in about 2000, so 25 years ago. I set myself the discipline of writing sonnets in Lent, like one a day for 40 days in Lent. And that was my Lenten discipline. And, this is a way to get, about 38 really terrible poems and maybe a couple of good ones. But you start I mean, in addition to just getting up in the morning and seeing the whole world in like rhyming 14-line increments, like your whole reality is shaped by these, 14 rhyming lines, but you start to get, at least I started to, fiddle with the sonnet rules and, and sort of go, how can I make this harder? And so this is one that I wrote probably in 2015, maybe. Anyway, the basic rule for this, other than it's being 14 lines, obviously, was that there are only three end words for the whole, four end words, sorry, four end words for this whole poem. And it's called Lookout Mountain and A Prayer for My Son. At midnight, I imagine you awake, shade rolled up, your window full of stars, except where those black shoulders blot them out. Big as a house, if houses were like mountains, it hunkers on the sky, and you, awake, may see it now and marvel that it sleeps when all the earth is wheeling with the stars through darkness. Oh, there's more N words than that. Sorry, lost count. When all the earth is wheeling with the stars through darkness, may you no longer mind the thought that even these rock-rooted mountains white-knuckle it, that even while it sleeps, creation begs the driving all-night mind behind the wheel, look out, look out, look out. Let's see, this poem is called Dear Apples. And these are just, the fruit stands in the country around the little North Carolina town where I live sell these, and probably this is everywhere, but, sell boxes of sort of damaged apples for people to use as bait for deer stands. And if you're cheap and not that picky about the perfection of your produce, you too can buy a big box of apples and freeze them and make applesauce and whatever. And it's, I'm cheap and I'm not that picky. So that's what I've done. And so that's what dear apples are. Dear apples. While you're still wondering what happened to the spring, in cool moonlight and the crickets whispering, the season turns, no more bridal lace. Purplish heat flushes the shifting face roadside dogwoods wear this hurried day. Back home, you're chopping apples to put away in the deep freeze for the winter, soft bruised windfalls. Dear apples, people say, the fruit stand sells $6 for a 20-odd pound box, debate hunters stands. Worm-bitten Gala, Cox, Granny Smith, some little ones whose name you don't know, all together breathe the same ripe smell, almost fermented. Now you cut the grainy flesh right down to the chambered heart, rigid as cartilage where the black seeds nest. You fill 10 Ziploc bags, but mound the best, least bitten apples in a bowl. It used to be that passing children ate them up immediately. Who'll eat them now before they liquefy inside their loosening skins? A waste, you'd cry, except that in this moment they're a feast to look at, heaped together in the last off-kilter light, curvaceous, red or gold as pollen, wax-cheeked, radiantly cold. And I'm going to read one more, and then I think that's probably enough. Let me find it. I'm going to finish with another one of my Lenten sonnets from some years ago, triggered by a question asked me by one of my children. I always say, I read this poem one time in the presence of my two youngest children, and when I had finished, one of them turned to the other and said, oh, now we know who's the favorite, which is kind of not the point of this poem at all, but that was this person's takeaway, and I'm still living that down. And this poem is called For You. Am I your favorite, you want to know? So I say yes, as every breath I take's my favorite breath. If say you're 8, that makes you my favorite 8-year-old. Ditto 765432110. You were my favorite series of summer earthquakes, my favorite live weight centered on the cervix, my favorite sight unseen that year. And so you are my favorite child right now because you stand before me, asking that my heart declare you first, you always. And it's true. It works this way. Love's strange elastic laws grant each child its undiluted part. And that, my love, is what I offer you. Thank you.